I stayed silent when they handed me that eviction notice. Instead, I calmly slid the 1923 water rights deed across the table, and just like that, 35 luxury homes became waterfront property overnight. The Willowbrook Estates HOA thought they could snatch my grandfather's land while I was deployed in Afghanistan. They built their suburban dream on stolen soil, complete with tennis club carons rolling around in golf carts. What they didn't count on: I'm an Army Corps of Engineers officer, and that humble earthen dam on my land, it had been lying in wait for 45 years, just hoping someone foolish enough would build downstream. Their arrogance was almost impressive right up until I opened the spillway and let Mother Nature introduce their gated paradise to real flooding. You're about to see one of the most satisfying takedowns in HOA history, brought to you by federal water law and good old-fashioned gravity. Tell me where you're tuning in from. This one's worth the watch. Let me introduce myself properly. I'm Jake Morrison. I'm 34, work with the Army Corps of Engineers, and I'm the third-generation steward of 47 acres of prime Texas countryside just outside Austin. My grandfather, everyone called him Pops, purchased this land in 1955, back when Austin was more about brisket than bandwidth. Pops was a land and people first kind of guy. In 1978, he constructed a simple but solid earth dam on the property. Nothing fancy, just sound engineering to trap rainwater for our cattle and support our downstream neighbors during dry spells. He even collaborated with the Army Corps to do it right. Pops used to say the back 40 acres would someday be worth more than gold. But back then, it was just scenic pasture land where we raised cattle and where I first learned to shoot and hunt. Then came my 2 tours in Afghanistan. I specialized in water infrastructure and flow control, a experience that taught me how valuable clean water is, and how quickly people are willing to fight for it. During my second tour, Pops passed away. The land went into a trust overseen by my well-meaning but clueless sister, Sarah. She lives in California and knows about as much Texas property law as I do about catching waves. She hired a local outfit, Owner Land Services, to handle taxes and maintenance. The taxes got paid, but here's the catch: Sarah never looked at the actual assessments. Huge oversight. Enter our antagonist, Margaret Maggie Thornwell. She's 52, runs the Willowbrook Estates HOA, and cruises around in a white BMW X7 while treating tennis skirts like their executive attire. Maggie's perfected that southern-style sweetness that feels more like a velvet blade to the back. Oh, and she's married to City Councilman Rick Thornwell, so that tells you exactly how she maneuvers behind the scenes. She's known for neighborhood beautification projects, a code for pushing out anyone who doesn't fit her curated suburbia. Underneath her floral perfume, there's a lingering cloud of cigarette smoke and entitlement. I got home from deployment in August 2023, ready to finally enjoy Pops's land. Driving down that old gravel road, past the oak tree where I'd carved my name as a kid, I expected to see familiar pastures and that glistening little dam. Instead, I ran into concrete mixers, survey stakes, and construction gear strewn across my back 40 like it had been invaded. My boots crunched on the gravel in a way that made me feel different, like the land was angry. The dust stung my throat as I marched toward the foreman. "Sorry, man," he said with a shrug. Clearly not sorry at all. "We've got permits. This is Willowbrook Estates property now." I called the police. Officer Martinez showed up and awkwardly explained that while I was overseas, the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim. Apparently, if no one visibly uses a piece of land and someone else makes improvements, they can try to claim ownership. It's a dusty old law that's supposed to prevent land from wasting away, but developers and HOAs have turned it into a land grab loophole. Then Maggie rolled up in her little golf cart like she was queen of the cul-de-sac. Her tone was sugar-coated poison. "Your family abandoned this place, sweetie," she chirped, grinning. "We're just using it for the good of the community." But what truly ignited my fury, I found out her construction crews had illegally rerouted the creek feeding Pops's dam. The water was disappearing fast. That dam had supported us and our neighbors through decades of droughts and floods, 45 years of careful stewardship being siphoned off without a second thought. As I stood there watching the waterline shrink, Maggie's parting words echoed in my head: "You should have stayed closer to home, soldier boy." That's when I knew this wasn't a property dispute. This was a battle. I hired the first lawyer I could find. Huge mistake. The guy quoted me $85,000 just to start contesting the zoning changes. Turns out, while I was overseas serving my country, Maggie's husband Rick quietly pushed through a zoning change. My family's land had been flipped from agricultural to residential development almost overnight, but that's where my training kicked in. While the lawyer was busy charging me hourly for busy work, I was combing through county records like I was sweeping a road for rides. And just like over there, the truth was buried in the fine print. I uncovered Pops's original dam permits from 1978 and they were a thing of beauty. See, Pops didn't just sketch out a dam on a napkin, he collaborated directly with the Army Corps of Engineers for flood control and watershed preservation. That meant one crucial thing: federal jurisdiction. And here's your first piece of real knowledge: any dam built under federal supervision means the feds still have a say in what happens downstream. Federal authority isn't something a local hoe can simply ignore. End of story. The rush of adrenaline hit hard the moment I understood what I'd uncovered. This wasn't just some land dispute anymore. This had the makings of a federal case. And just when I thought I'd hit gold, it got even better. While I was at the county records office photocopying the old dam permits, I stumbled on something remarkably: an original 1923 water rights deed buried in the archives. Turns out, my great-grandfather had secured senior water rights to all of Willow Creek. These rights weren't just old, they predated the city itself, the county's water infrastructure, and every last oversized house now squatting on my land. It wasn't just a land grab anymore. They were siphoning off my family's water. Meanwhile, Maggie was playing her own game, casting herself as the poor, concerned citizen. She pulled together an emergency home meeting and made sure a local news crew was on site to cover it. I watched her stand in front of her perfectly trimmed lawn on the evening broadcast, putting on the performance of a lifetime. "We're just worried about our children's safety," she said, tearing up on cue, tissue in hand. "That dam looks like it could give way at any moment, and we've got families living just downstream." Local media loves a dramatic headline, but when it comes to verifying facts, they're not always thorough. A simple check would have shown that the dam had passed its latest safety evaluation without issue. But Maggie wasn't stopping there. She took to the next-door epithet digital battlegrounds for petty neighborhood politics and posted warnings about escalating property tensions and unstable individuals in the area. She never mentioned my name directly, but she didn't have to. In a neighborhood that tight, everyone knew exactly who she meant. The late summer air was thick with cedar pollen and diesel fumes as I stood on my front porch each night, watching construction crews hustle to finish the development before I could legally intervene. Each evening, I counted more foundations poured. Each morning, I saw the water in the dam slip another inch lower. That's when I reached out to my old friend from the Army, Tony Riggs, now with the EPA's Enforcement Division. In just one phone call, Tony gave me more insight into environmental law than any of the overpriced attorneys I'd spoken with. "Jake," he said, "if they're diverting a natural waterway without proper federal permits, they're in violation of the Clean Water Act. And if that dam falls under federal oversight, a broken bar." He didn't need to finish. I already knew. I got to work. I started documenting every single thing. I placed trail cams all around the perimeter, took time-stamped photos of each water diversion, measured the creek's flow at 3 key spots. Every bit of data I could gather, I did. My sister Sarah called from California, pleading with me to just accept a buyout and move on. But this was no longer about a payout, it was about the sound of construction boots grinding into land that didn't belong to them. It was about Maggie's smug footsteps echoing through the courthouse during zoning hearings that never should have happened. It was about endless hours in government buildings, sipping bitter coffee and digging into layers of backroom deals and shady maneuvers. But more than anything, it was about the dam. Pops didn't build it for profit, he built it to serve. For decades, that dam helped our community weather droughts, floods, and everything in between. Now, Maggie's team was draining it to make it a glorified backyard feature for luxury homes. Here's what people don't always know about Texas: water rights are serious business. They're older than oil claims, older than mineral deeds, and a lot harder to manipulate if you know what you're doing. As I watched another concrete mixer drive past my kitchen window, it hit me. I wasn't going to win this in court. Not with legal filings and billable hours. I was going to win it with engineering. That's when Maggie tried to turn the pressure up even higher. She formed a so-called neighborhood safety patrol of 3 HOA board members in matching shirts who stationed themselves at the edge of my property like they were guarding a fortress. They photographed every visitor, jotted down license plates, and filed nuisance reports with the sheriff. It was classic intimidation, a death by 1,000 paper cuts. They filed noise complaints when I played music during chores, reported my old farmhousey standing strong since the early '60s for being unsightly, claimed my well-maintained septic system was an environmental hazard, even though it had passed inspection just months ago. But the low blow, that came when Rick, using his city council influence, requested a wellness check on me through Veterans Services. Suddenly I was flagged as a possibly unstable vet struggling with reintegration. A caseworker showed up, clipboard in hand, apologizing as she walked through her checklist while Maggie sat nearby in her golf cart, watching like some military commander overseeing a drill. Then came the real siege. Inspectors from every agency showed up in Forcia building, fire, health, animal control all on the same day. It was a bureaucratic ambush. Every department found minor issues that required costly fixes. The building inspector, who just so happened to be Rick's drinking buddy, declared my front porch unsafe and slapped me with an $8,000 repair order. I recognized the tactic immediately. It's the same playbook we used in conflict zones. Bury the opposition in red tape until they're forced to give in. But I'd seen this before and I knew how to respond. While they buried me in paperwork, I started making calls of my own. Tony Riggs at the EPA was more than intrigued when I told him that Maggie's HOA had skipped filing the mandatory wetlands impact report before altering Willow Creek. Turns out, shifting the course of a natural waterway even on privately owned land requires federal environmental clearance. Skipping that step isn't just sloppy, it's expensive. Fines start at $50,000 per day, and they stack up fast. Each morning, the sharp, acrid scent of freshly poured concrete reminded me just how little time I had left. But my digging was beginning to uncover things Maggie never expected. I discovered that the entire development had been built right in the heart of what the Army Corps had classified as a 100-year floodplain. At first, insurance companies wanted no part of it. They wouldn't offer coverage without a mitigation plan for flood risk. Their solution? Divert Willow Creek permanently away from their luxury homes and straight into my land. Here's another important fact. When developers lie on official forms to secure insurance, especially flood-related insurance that crosses into federal mail fraud territory, that's not just a civil fine, it's a potential criminal charge. And the more I uncovered, the clearer it became this wasn't Maggie's first time running a scheme like this. Her last HOA, back in Houston, had been hit with a $2.3 million fine from the EPA for pulling the same exact stunt with a different creek. She left the city just before federal prosecutors moved in and set up shop in Austin to start over a new town. Same playbook. While Maggie was out there painting herself as the community's savior, she was quietly waging war on my reputation. She began whispering rumors around the neighborhood about my supposed instability and violent tendencies. She hired a private investigator to dig into my military records, hoping to find something she could twist. Then came a petition to have my land declared a public nuisance. "We have families here," she told the press with mock concern. "We just can't risk having unstable individuals in the area." But while she played the victim in public, I was quietly building a coalition. Through online forums, I found others who'd been on the receiving end of whole land grabs. Story after story followed the same pattern of pressure campaigns, zoning manipulations, and sudden shifts in property lines that always seemed to benefit one person: Rick Thornwell, Maggie's husband. I teamed up with Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor, whose once thriving garden had withered since the creek was diverted. I met Miguel Santos, whose family farm had been zoned out of existence 2 years prior, courtesy of Rick's influence on the planning board. These weren't coincidences. This was a pattern, a deliberate strategy to take land, silence opposition, and reshape the community to their liking. Each day, The vibrations from the construction equipment shook my old farmhouse. Each night, I stood at my window documenting the slow collapse of Pop's Dam as more water was rerouted. But I wasn't just watching, I was preparing. I installed flow meters at key points of the dam's outlet, the newly carved creek channel, so I could calculate exactly how much water they were stealing. The number came to 1,200 gallons a day. That translates to $47,000 annually in agricultural water rights. Running the sand from the dry creek bed through my hands told a clearer story than any lawyer ever could. This wasn't just theft. This was full-scale environmental destruction. Then came the letter, certified, official. The city was moving to seize my property through eminent domain. Their excuse? Public safety. A hearing had already been scheduled, and it wasn't far off. Maggie gave a quote to the local paper that made her real intentions unmistakable. Sometimes, you have to protect the community from itself. That night, as I stood at the window, storm clouds started gathering in the distance. But they didn't feel like a threat. They felt like a sign. This was my moment. Maggie went all in. Rick fast-tracked the eminent domain hearing, leaving me with hardly any time to prepare. Then, the home made their move. They offered to buy my land for $180,000. Never mind that the land had been appraised at nearly $900,000. The message was clear. Accept this insult of an offer or lose everything. The local paper doubled down. They published a slanted article labeling me a dangerous holdout, a barrier to progress. The headline screamed, "Troubled Veteran Blocks Community Development." They even included a photo of my house that made it look like an abandoned shack rather than the strong, proud home it had always been. They picked the worst photo, possibly one where I looked like I hadn't slept in days. But Maggie's real masterpiece was the photo op she staged like a pro. 20 mothers lined up along the edge of my property, clutching their children, a hired photographer capturing their worried expressions as my farmhouse loomed ominously in the background. Her Facebook post went viral in hours. The hashtag, #ProtectOurKids. Our children deserve to grow up in safe neighborhoods, she told Channel 7, not under the shadow of whatever trauma he brought back from overseas. Here's the thing, she was partially right. I did bring something back from the military. I brought back a very sharp sense for spotting psychological warfare and the technical skills to fight back. That same week, Tony Riggs called with game-changing news. The EPA had officially launched a federal investigation into the unauthorized diversion of Willow Creek thanks to my complaint. But here was the real shocker. Maggie's old home in Houston, the one fined $2.3 million, the federal charges from that environmental violation didn't just disappear because she moved. They followed her. Federal environmental crimes stick with the person, not the zip code. While Maggie paraded herself online as a concerned citizen, I was uncovering the shaky foundation her empire was built on fraud. Her home's construction loans were tied to overinflated property values, propped up by one key promise: guaranteed access to water. If those water rights reverted to their rightful owner, it wouldn't just dent their value, it would collapse the entire financial structure. They stole my water to build their fortune. Now, the very thing they thought would make them rich was going to drown them in debt. And it showed. Maggie was starting to sweat. She offered me $400,000 in cash, no questions asked, with a 48-hour deadline. I turned her down without blinking. So she tried a different tactic. She flew to California and paid my sister Sarah a visit, spinning a story about me being unstable and in need of intervention. But that backfired spectacularly. Sarah might not be an expert in Texas land law, but she knows manipulation when she sees it, and she definitely knows her brother. She called me laughing. "Jake," she said, "some woman in tennis shoes just offered to help with my troubled veteran sibling. I told her to stay away or I'd report her to the FBI." While Maggie was burning bridges, I was building them. I teamed up with Amanda Cross, an environmental attorney known for taking on water rights cases pro bono. Together, we started forming a coalition with others who'd been affected by the creek diversion. Miguel Santos, whose family had worked the land for generations, brought forward documentation proving his farm had relied on that creek since 1887. Mrs. Chen shared old photographs of her grandfather tending a garden in the 1940s, sustained by the very same water now flowing into Maggie's designer fountains. The local Audubon Society got involved when they learned the creek diversion had wiped out critical nesting grounds for multiple protected bird species. And let's just say, harming protected wildlife while illegally rerouting water gets federal authorities moving very quickly. Out of habit, I began doing nighttime reconnaissance, old instincts, and during one of those checks, I rediscovered something extraordinary. A Pops Dam wasn't just a basic dirt embankment. It was a fully engineered structure, complete with a hydraulic spillway system installed in 1978. The emergency gates hadn't been opened in decades. One late night, I activated a small test. As water echoed through the old underground channels, I realized something amazing. The system still worked. It was built specifically for situations like this, controlled natural flooding to restore original flow paths. I ran the calculations. To return Willow Creek to its original route, I'd need to release 2.8 million gallons. The dam currently held 3.1 million, thanks to recent rains. The timing was perfect. With my drone, I mapped out the new home placements relative to the historical creek bed. 5 of them sat directly in the old flood channel. 3 had basements below the seasonal high water mark. And here's the kicker. Their contractors had built decorative stone-lined creek beds, beautiful to look at, but totally useless for actual water movement. Meanwhile, Pop's spillway system was built by the Army Corps for real flood control. Then Maggie overplayed her hand. Her crew started pouring concrete barriers to completely seal off the natural creek bed. That would destroy the spillway's usefulness and permanently damage the surrounding ecosystem. But it gave me exactly what I needed. Legal justification. The weather forecast called for significant rainfall. Perfect cover for emergency flood control maintenance. One evening, I stood at the spillway controls, reading a note Pop had written years ago about always helping your neighbors during dry times. Everything clicked into place. I was ready to act. While digging through courthouse files again, I stumbled on a document that changed the game. Tucked behind a pile of old tax assessments was the original covenant from the dam's construction. It was elegantly simple. Dam operators shall preserve natural seasonal flow to maintain downstream agricultural rights in perpetuity. This wasn't just a right, it was a legal duty. It overrode any HOA claim, zoning shift, or city ordinance. But Amanda Cross uncovered something even bigger: fraud in the HOA's insurance paperwork. They had flat out lied, claimed the area never experienced seasonal flooding, a broken bar. The developers had claimed that the permanent creek diversion posed no environmental risks and had been fully approved by regulatory bodies, all to secure a $47 million insurance policy. Here's your third key takeaway. Lying on insurance applications for land development isn't just a civil offense that can land you in federal prison. Falsifying environmental data for financial gain qualifies as mail fraud under federal law, and that carries mandatory sentencing. As we continued digging, the entire operation began to fall apart. Rick Thornell's construction firm wasn't just a contractor for the HOA, he was also the lead investor. Every single home built on the diverted land directly fattened his wallet. And get this, he never once recused himself from voting on city council measures that benefited his own project. Then Tony Riggs sent me EPA documents that made my blood boil. The creek diversion had wiped out the entire Guadalupe bass population, a protected species that had thrived in Willow Creek for generations. Texas Parks and Wildlife had even documented the die-off, but the report mysteriously vanished in Rick's office before it could trigger a federal investigation. They weren't just taking land and water away, they were erasing an entire ecosystem. The final blow came from Amanda's contacts in the banking world. The HOA's construction loans were secured using fake environmental reports, documents that claimed the creek redirection was only temporary and that water flow would be restored after the development was completed. That was a lie. If those water rights legally returned to me, the loans would be in violation of federal banking regulations. The banks could demand $12 million in immediate repayment. Then, in the attic of the old farmhouse, I found something that broke my heart. Pop's journals. In a faded entry from 1980, he'd written, "Opened the spillway today, helped the Santos farm and 3 others through the dry season." That's what neighbors do. That dam wasn't built for profit, it was built for people, to support local families, to manage the balance of drought and flood for everyone in the watershed. That's what Maggie really stole, not just land and water, but 45 years of trust and neighborly cooperation my grandfather spent a lifetime building. My engineering review confirmed what I feared. Maggie's creek diversion wasn't just unethical, it was dangerous. Redirecting the water had created an upstream flood risk. During heavy rainfall, it would back up into residential areas. The original creek bed had served as natural flood mitigation. Without it, there was only one system in place to prevent disaster at the dam and its spillway. But the pressure was mounting. Delays from legal channels and federal reviews couldn't compete with nature. The forecast warned of severe rain, and if I didn't act, flooding would come anyway, uncontrolled and destructive. Or, I could act now. A calculated release through the spillway would guide the water safely along its natural path, show environmental officials the true flow pattern, and prove the development was violating federal law. As I stood there, holding Pop's journal at the dam control station, the purpose became clear. This wasn't about getting even anymore. It was about preserving what had kept this land alive for generations. Maggie had torn apart the farming community. Miguel Santos lost his family's century-old land. Mrs. Chen's family garden dried up, and 3 more families were forced off their property due to Rick's strong-arm tactics. But with federal inspectors scheduled to arrive soon, this was the opportunity to let the creek speak for itself, to prove the fraud, to show the damage. The familiar smell of hydraulic oil filled my lungs. I knew this equipment Pop had built it to last. And now, standing there as the storm gathered on the horizon, I made the call. It was time to honor Pop's legacy and open the gates. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was a coordinated mission, executed with legal authority, environmental justification, and backed by the local community. I started by bringing together my team. Amanda Cross led the legal charge, filing new federal complaints to ensure we'd attract media coverage when the spillway opened. Tony Riggs ensured EPA investigators would be present for what he described as a demonstration of natural flood behavior. Miguel Santos compiled records of 4 decades worth of agricultural losses downstream. His testimony showed how the creek diversion was devastating farmland that had fed families for generations. Mrs. Chen offered up her land as a command post and added credibility through her standing as the community's most respected elder. Amanda's legal approach was genius. She submitted an emergency motion to restore agricultural water rights, arguing that I was legally bound by the dam covenant to maintain seasonal flooding for downstream farmers. We weren't defying the law, we were upholding it. Knowledge nugget: in many states, agricultural water rights can override residential development claims, especially when you have documented historical usage backing your position. Paperwork that predates any recent developments is the golden ticket. My technical plan followed Army Corps protocols, detailed, precise, and carefully calculated. I designed a step-by-step spillway operation plan, a controlled release beginning at dawn, gradually increasing over several hours, peaking mid-morning. The release was engineered to reveal natural flooding patterns without causing any structural harm except to Maggie's illegal concrete structures. Safety was non-negotiable. Warning signs were posted a full day in advance. I personally alerted the local fire department. This wasn't chaos, it was a precisely managed operation to show the water's rightful path. Amanda reached out to environmental journalists and local news outlets. Miguel mobilized community members to witness the restoration effort firsthand. Our strategy was simple: shape the story before Maggie could twist it into something false like rogue veteran floods neighborhood. Our information network could have been ripped from a spy thriller. Mrs. Chen kept tabs on HOA chatter through her unofficial neighborhood grapevine. Never underestimate the intel's power of retirees with social reach. A waitress at the local diner, Miguel's cousin, shared notes from closed-door city council meetings. My army contact at Fort Hood provided drone footage for legal evidence. While I was modernizing the spillway controls, Amanda launched a full-scale financial offensive. She provided insurance companies with proof of fraud, alerted banking regulators to sketchy loan documents, and prepped whistleblower reports exposing Rick's conflicts of interest. It was all about timing. The weather reports confirmed heavy rainfall ahead. Amanda made sure federal environmental inspectors would be on site during the storm. Miguel coordinated with the Agricultural Extension Office to document benefits to downstream lands. All forces, a natural, legal, and social, were coming together at just the right moment. I also knew how Maggie operated. She always lashed out under pressure. I expected an emergency home meeting, smear campaigns, maybe even a restraining order from her favorite corrupt judge. Amanda was ready with legal countermeasures for every anticipated move. Evidence preservation was a priority. I collected extensive photo documentation of the creek's current state, filmed testimonials from affected farmers, and gathered old photos that showed the original creek bed and historic flood patterns. Amanda filed it all in federal court to lock it down legally. Our safety strategy included coordination with the fire department, direct communication with residents downstream, and multilingual warning signs. I even drafted an evacuation plan, not because it would be needed, but to show we were acting responsibly at every step. Amanda kept the pressure high. She tipped off state banking officials about fraudulent loan practices, submitted insurance fraud evidence to the Texas Attorney General, and prepared a civil RICO suit accusing Rick and others of racketeering. Knowledge nugget: when multiple regulators get involved at once, it becomes nearly impossible for perpetrators to defend all fronts, pushing them toward settlement far faster than isolated lawsuits ever could. The scent of machine oil and WD-40 filled the air as I tested the dam's controls under low pressure. Every component worked flawlessly. Pops had engineered the system for moments just like this, moments when someone would need to fight for the creek and the people who relied on it. I stocked the farmhouse with essentials, knowing Maggie would pull every dirty trick in the book. Amanda had already secured protective court orders barring interference with lawful dam activity. We set up secure communication using military-grade encrypted radios. As I conducted the final systems check, storm clouds loomed in the distance. Everything was falling into place: weather, legal action, and federal oversight. Maggie, meanwhile, was busy prepping for another TV appearance, probably planning one more hit piece against me. But we were ready. At first light, justice would flow, and 45 years worth of stolen water would return home. Faced with this momentum, Maggie's desperation hit a new peak. She hired private security to start patrolling my property. Maggie escalated things again, this time with a private security detail patrolling the edge of my land. These weren't your average rent-a-cops holding flashlights. They were decked out in full tactical gear, the kind who usually work overseas contracts and think a neighborhood dispute is a combat mission. My trail cams caught them red-handed. In the dead of night, they attempted to sabotage the spillway's hydraulic controls. One genius tried to jam quickset concrete into the lines while the other kept watch. Fortunately, Tony Riggs had already tipped off the sheriff's office. Deputy Rodriguez was hidden nearby, waiting. When the saboteurs made their move, so did he. It was a textbook takedown. The guy in the tactical vest claimed they were there to protect community infrastructure from a disturbed individual. Hard to sell that story when you're caught with a bag of concrete at 2 in the morning. Meanwhile, Maggie launched her full media offensive. She went on a morning talk show, dressed to impress and sounding every bit the concerned citizen. Her voice quivered as she said, "Veterans need counseling, not control of dangerous infrastructure." She wiped her eyes with a tissue and added, "This man learned to weaponize water in Afghanistan. Now he's threatening to flood homes where children sleep." Rick played backup, offering his expert opinion as a city engineer. He warned of potential dam failures, carefully omitting the fact that mine had passed every inspection for nearly 5 decades. While they spun their narrative, I stuck to what I know: surveillance and documentation. Every trespass, every tampered valve, every violation was captured and logged. Tony shared a key detail: federal agents had been wiretapping Rick's office phone as part of an active corruption investigation. Things were worse than I'd thought. Then came the legal ambush. Rick rushed through a restraining order hearing set for the crack of dawn, clearly hoping we'd be unprepared. The judge assigned was Henry Walshaw, a longtime golf partner of Rick's and recipient of hefty campaign contributions from Rick's construction firm. Amanda was on it. She immediately filed a motion demanding Walsh's recusal, citing conflict of interest. But we both knew what was really going on. If they couldn't win through law, they'd try to win through influence. Maggie didn't stop there. She coordinated what she called a neighborhood safety patrol, a live-streamed event with HOA residents sitting outside my property in lawn chairs, holding "Protect Our Kids" signs and sipping from coolers. They were trying to paint a perfect picture. Friendly suburban families standing up to a rogue veteran with a dam. But we had support too. Miguel Santos rallied dozens of local farmers and families who came out in favor of what we called agricultural water restoration. Mrs. Chen coordinated a counter-demonstration, complete with historical photos showing how the creek once flowed naturally. Amanda brought in representatives from the Sierra Club and the Audubon Society to stand witness. It was no longer just my fight, it was two opposing truths crashing together. Their story was about fear, ours was about justice. But then it escalated again. Security footage revealed that someone had poured concrete into the spillway itself, creating a dangerous obstruction. If I'd opened the gates as planned, that blockage could have caused serious downstream flooding. This wasn't mischief. It was a deadly trip, a sabotage meant to hurt people. I worked through the night, using a portable jackhammer to break up the hardened cement while documenting every piece for evidence. Fatigue gnawed at me, but fury kept me going. They were willing to endanger lives just to stop the flow of water. Then Rick played his final card. He used his emergency city council powers to declare my dam a public hazard. That gave the fire department authority to secure the site. But Fire Chief Martinez, one of the last honest men in town, pulled me aside. "Jake," he said, "they've got me boxed in. You've only got a few hours before I'm forced to shut it all down. Use the time wisely." At the same time, Amanda struck gold. Her insurance fraud report finally triggered a full state investigation. The Texas Insurance Commission acted swiftly, freezing all development-related insurance policies tied to the HOA. Without insurance coverage, the construction company's entire operation was hanging by a thread. The construction company was hit with a sudden work halt once their insurance coverage froze. Finally, financial pressure was landing exactly where it hurt Maggie and Rick the most: their wallets. Tony accelerated the EPA's visit by a full day after reports of sabotage were deemed credible. Now, federal agents were on their way, with plans to assess the site during the spillway operation. If it proceeded under their watch, it would serve as federal proof of compliant water management. But Maggie had one more card to play, and it was her most truthless yet. She reached out to Veterans Mental Health Services, falsely reporting that I'd made suicidal statements and should be placed under involuntary psychiatric observation. A VA social worker showed up at my doorstep just as I was preparing for the spillway release. I had to remain composed, prove I was of sound mind, and coordinate a complex hydraulic operation. A not your average morning. Sarah called from California, her voice cracked with emotion. "I can't lose my brother too. Please, Jakey, a broken bar. This isn't what Dad would have wanted." For a brief moment, her words shook me, but then I found Dad's final journal entry, a note about standing up to bullies, and my determination returned, steady and unshakable. "Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek." With dawn breaking and federal agents in position, I opened the spillway to 25%. The sound that followed wasn't violent, it was peaceful. Water whispered back into its rightful course. After nearly 2 years of silence, Willow Creek flowed once again in its natural bed. Miguel Santos knelt at the water's edge, his weathered hands scooping up the cool current. Tears rolled down his cheeks. "This is the same water that fed my grandfather's fields for 6 decades, he murmured. Maggie's reaction was swift and explosive. She shouted at the federal agents, demanding they detain me. Her carefully curated media persona cracked wide open. But EPA agent Sarah Kim remained calm. "Ma'am, this man has full legal authority to operate this agricultural flood control system," she said firmly. Maggie, however, was live streaming to her followers, her voice writhing in panic. "He's flooding our children's homes. This is what happens when unstable veterans are armed." But nothing was actually flooding. The water flowed exactly where it had always belonged. Through the creek her development had unlawfully obstructed. News helicopters hovered above, Broadcasting the Operation Live, a local journalist was interviewing nearby farmers about their newly restored water access when Maggie barged in, trying to seize the camera. "This veteran is using his military skills to attack civilians," she cried. The reporter, clearly skeptical, asked, "Ma'am, the water is flowing in the original creek bed. How is this an attack?" You could almost hear Maggie's narrative falling apart in real time. Meanwhile, Rick was furiously calling Judge Walsh, yelling about lost property values and campaign donations. "He's destroying millions in equity," he shouted, completely unaware that Amanda was recording him from the courthouse steps. For context, Texas is a one-party consent state, which means only one person needs to agree to record a conversation, and that person can be the one hitting record. EPA agent Kim confirmed the water flow matched historic seasonal levels. Tony captured every moment on video. "This is the natural path before the 2022 diversion," he noted. "Federal environmental standards favor restoring natural flow over development interests, and we were proving that principle, right there on the ground." Mrs. Chen's garden irrigation system sprang back to life. 3 nearby farms reported water returning to their stock ponds. The owner of the local diner dropped by with coffee and fresh pastries, beaming, "My dad farmed here. This is how it's meant to be." Even Maggie's most loyal backers started slipping away quietly. They saw with their own eyes that no homes were flooding. It's tough to keep up a sense of moral outrage when the supposed disaster is just water going back to its natural course. The collapse of their house of cards picked up speed. The state issued a cease and desist to the construction company, halting all development until the fraud investigation was completed. Maggie soon found out her personal homeowner's insurance was also under threat due to false water access claims. But she still wasn't done scheming. In a panic, she called Rick and shouted, "Get your trucks down here and block that spillway." Despite everything, Rick still hadn't learned. He sent 3 concrete trucks to accidentally dump their loads across the creek. Federal agents wasted no time, and the drivers were arrested on the spot for interfering with a federal environmental investigation. That's not a civil offense. It's a felony. Technically, everything had gone just as I'd planned. Water levels quickly stabilized, meeting both agricultural and environmental standards. No residential areas were flooded, and the creek flowed neatly within its natural banks, exactly as decades of seasonal patterns had always shown it would. My planning, rooted in Army Corps engineering, had been spot on. The political fallout was immediate. Councilman Martinez arrived on site and publicly demanded Rick's resignation. "This scandal has made our city a national embarrassment," he told reporters gathered around. "You're finished." Federal investigators widened their case, now pursuing racketeering charges related to systematic land fraud. Tony later told me, "This is the evidence we needed to pursue criminal charges." But the most satisfying moment came when Maggie finally understood that her $2.3 million investment had become worthless. Without illegal access to water, the development held no value. She shouted across the creek, "You've ruined everything for 35 families." I responded evenly, loud enough for every news camera to hear, "No, ma'am, I restored what was stolen. Your families can acquire legal water rights just like everyone else." She turned away, ranting about federal lawsuits that never came to pass. As Miguel's extended family gathered with homemade tamales and cold beers, and Mrs. Chen offered a traditional tea ceremony to honor the restored waterway, it hit me this was never about getting even. It was about rebuilding the kind of community Pops had nurtured, one neighbor, one drought, one small act of generosity at a time. Public sentiment flipped completely. Environmental groups praised the spillway effort as a blueprint for restoring ecosystems. The media stopped calling it Veteran Floods Neighborhood and started reporting the real headline: "Community reclaims stolen water." Sometimes, the truth finds its way home as naturally as a creek flowing back to its source. The courtroom was standing room only. Judge Walsh's chambers were packed with journalists, farmers, residents, and federal officers. Even the hallway and windows were crowded with people watching the proceedings unfold. You could feel the weight of it. This wasn't just another hearing. This was a public reckoning. Maggie made her grand entrance with a fleet of expensive attorneys from Houston, expert witnesses, and enough legal backup to stage a coup. Gone was the tennis outfit in its place, a black dress, pearls, and the polished persona of a selfless community defender. Amanda and I arrived quietly. I wore a plain button-down and my father's old cowboy hat. Sometimes the strongest armor is authenticity. The courtroom felt like a divided wedding. On one side, whole loyalists clutched signs reading "Protect our kids." On the other, weathered hands and determined faces of people who had worked that land for generations. Maggie's legal team kicked things off with dramatic flair, pointing to muddy construction photos and claiming millions in damages caused by the spillway. Then came their psychiatrist, a man who had never met me, spouting theories of combat-driven revenge fantasies, all based on newspaper articles. "Your Honor," the lawyer declared theatrically, pointing at me like a criminal, "this unbalanced veteran is using military tactics to terrorize innocent families. He's weaponized water." The gallery buzzed in disbelief until Amanda stood. She presented the 1978 Agricultural Covenant, clearly mandating seasonal flood management. EPA agent Kim took the stand next, confirming the water release had simply restored the creek to its natural flow and caused no harm to property. Historical records supported every claim. The current water levels mirrored more than half a century of natural seasonal flow. Here's a final fact for the record. In court, legally documented water rights always outweigh recent development claims, especially with federal backing. Then Tony Riggs took the stand. As the EPA enforcement officer, his testimony cut through the noise like a scalpel. The hose project had violated multiple environmental laws, committed insurance fraud, and damaged protected habitats. Judge Walsh squirmed as the details piled up, visibly weighing the cost of loyalty to Rick against the risk of becoming entangled in federal obstruction charges. The moment of collapse came when Amanda called Rick as a witness. Under oath, he admitted to approving zoning changes while I was deployed and confessed his financial interest in the construction company. When Amanda played his recorded call about destroying property values, Rick snapped at a broken bar. "This is a federal setup," Rick shouted as he stormed toward the exit. We did nothing wrong, but the audio recording of his own words told a different story, clearer than any prosecutor ever could. What truly moved the room, though, were the voices of the community. Miguel Santos gave a heartfelt account of how 3 generations of his family's farming livelihood had been wiped out by the creek's diversion. His voice cracked as he spoke about his grandfather's dreams being lost with the stolen water. Mrs. Chen quietly shared before and after photos of her once flourishing family Gardena, once green and vibrant, now dry and lifeless. Her quiet grace conveyed more than any argument ever could. Fire Chief Martinez took the stand and affirmed that the spillway project had been handled with full professionalism, with no safety violations whatsoever. Farmers downstream confirmed their irrigation access had been completely restored. Then Maggie stepped up for what would be her dramatic finale. "He came back from war damaged, Your Honor," she said, pointing at me with a shaking hand. "He's targeting innocent families, waging psychological warfare on children." She accused me of threatening her and described the spillway as an act of ecoterrorism meant to destroy homes and spread fear. When Amanda called me to testify, the room fell into a hush. I brought out Pop's journals, decades of handwritten records showing a legacy of water sharing in our community. I walked the court through my engineering calculations from my time with the Army Corps and looked directly at Judge Walsh. "Your Honor," I said, "I didn't flood anyone. I restored a creek that was wrongfully taken from my family and this community." And then came the defining moment. Amanda submitted documents showing that Maggie's Houston HOA had been fined $2.3 million by the EPA for pulling the exact same illegal creek stunt elsewhere. The federal prosecutor stood up and officially launched a criminal case into multi-state water fraud. The courtroom burst into noise as the scope of the corruption unraveled before everyone's eyes. Judge Walsh had no room to maneuver. He threw out all requests for restraining orders, ruled that my spillway operation was both legal and beneficial, and ordered the HOA to back off from any interference in the ongoing federal investigation. His final words to Rick were sharp: "This court will not stand in the way of lawful federal environmental enforcement." Federal agents led Rick out of the courthouse while financial investigators handed out more warrants. Maggie, now surrounded by reporters, refused to speak and fled in her BMW, likely already making calls to moving companies. As I stepped outside, I was met with applause farmers, conservationists, and everyday folks cheering. Amanda held a spontaneous press briefing, announcing the full RICO investigation. Miguel thanked me on behalf of all the families impacted. My words were simple. This was never about revenge. It was about doing right by the land and the people who rely on it. Justice finally flowed, just like the creek itself. Rick Thornwell later pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and was sentenced to serve time. Maggie was slapped with millions in civil penalties and quickly filed for bankruptcy. The construction firm paid hefty EPA fines and was barred from future government work. The HOA collapsed, replaced by a new resident-led association focused on protecting the environment, not controlling people. My own land regained its full value thanks to its federal environmental designation, higher than any development ever promised. The money from the insurance fraud case helped me buy back Miguel's family farm at auction. I returned it to him, debt-free. Turns out, restoring the land can be more profitably and more powerful than paving over it. The real win, though, was the transformation of the community itself. The creek became a local hub for kayaking, bird watching, and fishing. Where luxury homes were once planned, Mrs. Chan's garden stood proud, and now a model for sustainable agriculture. 3 farms downstream reported their best harvests in years. The town diner turned into a gathering spot for the new Willow Creek Restoration Association, where folks met to fight back against future water exploitation. The environmental turnaround shattered all expectations. Wildlife bounced back rapidly. Rare bird species returned. The creek earned an official designation as a protected wildlife corridor. My project even got written into the training manuals at the Army Corps of Engineers. Sometimes the best revenge? Just doing your job the right way. As for me, I found a sense of peace I hadn't known I needed. I restored Pop's old house using green construction methods. Sarah came back from California to help grow our agri-business. And Amanda and I, well, when you take on environmental corruption side by side, it builds a bond nothing can break. Word about what happened at Willow Creek rippled across Texas like water, carving a new path. Environmental groups began using our case as a blueprint to confront illegal water diversions across the state. Federal agencies started referencing our success in updated enforcement strategies for water rights. Without intending to, I found myself stepping into a new role, informally advising communities facing the same kind of HOA overreach we fought. The calls haven't stopped since. We created the Pops Morrison Environmental Scholarship to support rural students pursuing studies in water resource management. Miguel's daughter, Maria, was the first to receive it. She's now at Austin, studying environmental engineering with one goal: to protect Texas watersheds from people like Maggie. The annual Creek Days Festival became a celebration of everything we fought for: restoration, resilience, and unity. The event features local food, environmental workshops, and support programs for veterans. One of the most impactful efforts from the festival has been the creation of a legal defense fund that's already helped 6 communities challenge corporate water grabs. But the part that always gets me? The laughter of children splashing in the creek right where luxury homes were supposed to be built. Water flows freely there now, because a community refused to give up. Every Sunday, I walk to Pop's grave and bring a jar of creek water just like he used to do after storms to check the flow. It's singing again. Pops, I tell him, just like you said it would. To make sure this victory lasts, we established the Willow Creek Conservation Trust. It now holds the development rights to the entire watershed, creating a permanent barrier against commercial intrusion. No one will ever take this water again. And here's the twist Maggie didn't see coming: her Houston HOA ended up facing federal RICO charges because of the precedent set by our case. Families from 147 neighborhoods across 3 states filed lawsuits to reclaim stolen water rights. What began as one veteran's mission turned into a national movement for environmental justice. Now, in the quiet of the evening, sitting on my porch, I watch the creek run where it always belonged. It's a daily reminder that some battles demand everything you've got, and that the real strength comes from standing with your neighbors and protecting what's right. If you're up against environmental destruction, or red tape designed to wear you down, don't stop. Keep records, find allies, and know this: The law is on your side when you're fighting to preserve the land for the next generation. Drop a comment with your horror story. I read them all and try to reply when I can. These battles are easier when we've got each other's backs. Hit subscribe if you want to hear more stories of real communities beating back corruption and winning. Your voice matters, your vote matters, and your creek, that matters more than you know. Next week, I'll tell you the story of the city that tried to seize my neighbor's solar farm and how she got revenge by cutting the power to City Hall during the mayor's wedding reception. That one's about a different kind of power and how one determined engineer turned out the lights on an entire system of municipal corruption. Water always finds a way. So does justice. And when communities rise together, there's nothing they can't restore. Willow Creek runs free and it always will.